everyone, and welcome to another edition of Readings, and this is for the month of June 2020. I am your host for today, Dipika Mukherjee, and it is an absolute delight to welcome you to another event. We are, of course, again online this month for obvious reasons, so I hope that you are staying safe and you have access to many books wherever in the world you are. Readings, for those of you who really don't know much about it or maybe are not from Malaysia, is a long-standing series that has been running for about 15 years in this beautiful building in Bangsar in Kuala Lumpur. And my absolutely favorite being in the audience is the resident dog, who comes and curls up near our toes. So we are going to be doing this, of course, all entirely online today. So I would like to invite you all to just grab a glass of whatever is your potion of choice and just sit down and enjoy the voices of our amazing readers. Today is a very star-studded reading lineup, and the first writer that I'm going to introduce you to is probably someone who needs no introduction because you have seen her work on TV. Yangsze Choo is a New York Times best-selling novelist and also a fourth-generation Malaysian Chinese writer. Her first novel, The Ghost Bride, came out in 2013 and is now a Netflix original series. And I was really interested to see how social media kind of went a little wild about how yummy the villain in that series happened to be as compared to the hero. So if you have not read the book, and here is the book, or seen the series, I strongly recommend that you get on Netflix or get to a bookstore and get the book and read it. It really brings the old Malacca scenes alive. Her next book is The Night Tiger, which came out in 2019, and it was a Reese Witherspoon Book Club pick, as well as one of the best books of the year on Amazon. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Yangsze Choo, reading from The Night Tiger in her own inimitable way. And Yangsze is also going to tell us something very interesting about what we should not eat before recording our own Audible books. So enjoy.
Hello, I'm Yangsze Choo, author of The Ghost Bride, now Netflix series, and The Night Tiger, one of Reese Witherspoon's book club picks. During this time of staying home for MCO, I'm delighted to be here to read a little from my novel, The Night Tiger. And as a matter of fact, I actually read the audiobook for this. For those who'd like to know a little more about what goes into recording and reading an audiobook, it took me about 5 days of 8 hours of recording each day at a studio. I think the total recording time was 14 hours, finished recording time, but you need the extra time to correct mistakes made when you're reading, even when it's something like, oh, you swallowed the end of the word. So usually, as I discovered, fiction authors don't read their work. Non-fiction writers do it more often, but for fiction, publishers tend to use professional voice actors because they tend to do a better job. But for both my novels, however, I asked my publisher in each case if they would consider letting me audition to read it. And the reason being that they're both set in Malaysia. The dialogue includes Chinese dialects in Cantonese and Malay. And I was afraid that if they got an American voice actor to read it, that my friends and family in Malaysia would just kill me if there were mispronunciations. So when we did the recording, the actual recording itself takes place in a recording studio, which looks like a glass box or a hamster cage. And there was a lot of fancy, expensive equipment. But the thing that really struck me about it was how silent it was. The studio is specially designed so that outside noises don't filter in. And every day they would mark out the exact spot where I should be relative to the microphone, so that you don't change the quality of the sound. When we started recording, I asked if there were any special instructions, and one of the producers told me, like, please don't eat dairy. That means don't drink milk and eat ice cream, because it tends to apparently gum you up. And the second thing they said was, please don't wear noisy clothes. So what do you mean by that? I asked. And according to the producer, one time they had an aging rock star come in to read his memoirs, and he was wearing leather pants and a lot of jewelry, so he was squeaked like a sofa while he was reading. So you have to wear quiet clothes like elastic pants and yoga clothes. I really enjoyed reading the audiobooks for both my novels. It was a pleasure and a privilege. There were a lot of standing over 5 days. I ended up choosing to stand up because the sound is better, but it was quite tiring. But I really enjoyed it, and amazingly, my novel Night Tiger was a finalist last year for an Audie Award, which is sort of like the audiobook version of the Emmys, for Best Literary Fiction and Classics. So I hope you enjoy it too. And now, in the remaining time left, I will read you a little bit of the Night Tiger, starting from chapter 1. Just for fun, I thought I would show you a few of the different editions of Night Tiger. This is the UK edition. This is the, I'm carrying too many books. This is the US edition. You see the covers are quite different. And I happen to also have one of the foreign editions. The German edition looks completely different. So I'm going to read from the, I think the UK edition, because the print is larger for my middle-aged eyes. This book was dedicated to my mother and father, who were born and grew up in the Kinta Valley. And actually it's set in Ipoh and Batu Gajah, and my grandparents also lived in the same area. So we went back a lot when I was a kid. Chapter 1, Kamunting, Malaya, May 1931. The old man is dying. Ren can see it in the shallow breaths, the sunken face, and the skin stretched thinly over his cheekbones. Yet he wants the shutters open. Irritably, he beckons the boy over, and Ren, his throat tight as though he swallowed a stone, throws open the second-story window. Outside is a brilliant sea of green, the waving tops of jungle trees, and a blue sky like a fever dream. The tropical glare makes Ren flinch. He moves to shield his master with his shadow, but the old man stops him with a gesture. Sunlight emphasizes the tremor of his hand with its ugly stump of a missing finger. Ren remembers just how, a few months ago, that hand could still calm babies and suture wounds. The old man opens his watery blue eyes, those colourless foreign eyes that had frightened Ren so much in the beginning, and whispers something. The boy bends his cropped head closer. Remember? The boy nods. Say it. The hoarse rasp is fading. When you are dead, I will find your missing finger, Ren replies, in a clear, small voice. And, he hesitates, and bury it in your grave. Good. The old man draws a rattling breath. You must get it back before the 49 days of my soul are over. The boy has done many such tasks before, quickly and competently. He'll manage even as his narrow shoulders convulse. Don't cry, Ren. At times like this, the boy looks far younger than his years. The old man is sorry. He wishes he could do it himself, but he's exhausted. Instead, he turns his face to the wall. Chapter 2. Ipoh, Malaya, Wednesday, June 3rd. 44 is an unlucky number for Chinese. It sounds like die, definitely die, and as a result, the number 4 and all its iterations are to be avoided. On that ill-fated day in June, I'd been working at my secret part-time job at the Mayflower Dance Hall in Ipoh for exactly 44 days. My job was a secret because no respectable girl should be dancing with strangers, despite our services being advertised as instructors. as perhaps we were for most of our customers, nervous clerks and schoolboys who bought rolls of tickets to learn to foxtrot and waltz or do the ronging, that charming Malay dance. The rest were buaya or crocodiles, as we called them, toothy smilers whose wandering hands were only deterred by a sharp pinch. I was never going to make much money if I kept slapping them off like this, but I hoped I wouldn't need to for long. It was to pay a debt of 40 Malayan dollars that my mother had incurred at a ruinously high interest rate. My real day job as a dressmaker's apprentice wasn't enough to repay the money, and my poor foolish mother couldn't possibly come up with it by herself. She'd no luck at gambling. If she'd only left statistics to me, things might have turned out better, as I'm generally good at numbers. I say this, but without much pride. It's a skill that hasn't been very useful to me. If I were a boy, it would be a different matter, but my delight in working out probabilities when I was 7 years old was of no help to my mother, who'd just been widowed at the time. In the sad vacuum of my father's passing, I spent hours penciling numbers on scraps of paper. They were sensible and orderly, unlike the chaos our household had descended into. Despite that, my mother kept her sweet, vague smile, the one that made her look like Goddess of Mercy, though she was probably worrying about what we'd eat for dinner. I loved her fiercely, though more about that later. The first thing the dance hall mama told me to do when I was hired was to cut my hair. I'd spent years growing it out after teasing from my stepbrother Shin about how I looked like a boy. Those 2 long braids, neatly tied with ribbons, just as they'd been all the years I'd attended the Anglo-Chinese girls' school, were a sweet symbol of femininity. I believed they covered up a multitude of sins, including the unladylike ability to calculate interest rates on the fly. "No," the mama said, "you can't work for me like that." "But there are other girls with long hair," I pointed out. "Yes, but not you." She sent me to an alarming woman who snipped off my braids. They fell into my lap, heavy and almost alive. If Shin could see me, he'd die laughing. I bent my head as she clipped, the nape of my exposed neck frighteningly vulnerable. She cut bangs in front, and when I raised my eyes, she smiled. "Look beautiful," she said. "Look exactly like Louise Brooks." Who was Louise Brooks anyway? Apparently a silent movie star who was wildly popular a few years ago. I blushed. It was difficult to get used to the new fashion in which flat-chested tomboys like me should suddenly become popular. Of course, being in Malaya and on the far outskirts of the empire, we were sadly behind in style. British ladies who came east complained of being 6 to 12 months behind the London fashions. It was no surprise then that the craze for ballroom dancing and cropped hair was finally hitting Ipoh when they'd been in full swing elsewhere for quite a while. I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay safe. Take care.
Our next reader is Damayanti Biswas. Damayanti Biswas's You Beneath Your Skin is a searing look at acid attacks in India. And breaking news, it has just been optioned by Endemol Shine for a multi-part TV series. This book is a thriller in every sense of the word, and Damayanti is also one of these very rare writers that funnels all her royalties into charitable donations. So when you buy her book, you help an acid attack victim live a life of dignity, or you help a disadvantaged Indian child get an education. So here is Damayanti reading from You Beneath Your Skin.
Hi, my name is Damayanti Biswas. Very pleased to be reading today. This is where my writing journey began with Sharon Bakar's classes. Today I'm going to read for you a small excerpt from You Beneath Your Skin, a crime novel set in New Delhi. It's more of a why-done-it than a who-done-it, and the scene that I'm going to read for you is set in a morgue with Anjali Morgan, the psychologist who is in a long-standing affair with Jatin Bhatt, a police commissioner. He's a really corrupt guy. And he has asked her to go and look at the corpse and give her opinion because due to reasons of his own, he does not want the body to go through the regular forensic channels. So here's the bit in the morgue. Drawing her scarf closer about her neck, Anjali stepped out of Kusum's jeep at the Safdarjung mortuary. The sooty air made her cough, the chill about her face like the touch of a spiteful ghost, light yet unmistakable in its malign intent. It was far colder where she was headed. A harshingar, still blooming in early November, had left a carpet of stale flowers on the ground beside the entrance. Nikhil loved to crush the orange stems of the tiny white flowers. He was the one who had taught her its name. Daylight had dwindled, and at this run-down building behind the main hospital, Anjali heard no sound other than the distant chitter of roosting birds in the trees bordering the parking lot. "Are you all right, Anjali ji?" Anjali liked this policewoman Jatin sent with her. Dusky, muscular, the relaxed face of someone who slept well at night with an unburdened conscience. Kusum's presence reassured Anjali, though the woman's head barely leveled with Anjali's shoulders. "Sure, let's go in." Anjali zipped up her fleece jacket. "I'm going to find the doctor," Kusum smiled. "You'll wait for me?" The temperature had dropped to 6 degrees that afternoon. Nikhil had smashed a flower vase and a few plates at lunch. Maya and the housekeeper Ira struggled with the season's first flu, and Anjali felt as if she'd drunk too much coffee and wine all at once. Each hotel room rendezvous with Jatin ended in a crash. Her body ached and her mind grew numb with the effort of trying to tamp down the guilt. She dabbed Vicks under her nose. It stung, but helped fade out the stench of detergents and bleach that led the mortuary corridor and the butcher shop odor lurking beneath the chemicals. That smell took her back to her childhood grocery trips with her dad on Sundays, where they chose steak for mom, chicken or lamb for her and dad. She might have been American, but her Hindu father had insisted she not eat beef. Right now, she must drag her Hindu-American butt through the long corridor lined with racks and drawers and study a corpse without flinching or throwing up. Must study it and find her way to the killer. Not think about how it had once been a living, breathing person or how it would soon be turned into ash and charred bones. The cold afternoon seeped into the narrow corridor, and Anjali drew her scarf tighter. Her gut told her to upchuck her lunch and run, but she needed to go through with this for Jatin. She wanted to hold his large, reassuring hand while she walked down the corridor. Kusum stood in front of her instead, and the doctor in charge, a balding, soft-spoken old man with a straggly beard. He wore a lab coat over his sweater, no other barrier against what could be a whole host of infections. He offered them coats, masks, and gloves, and while Anjali accepted, Kusum waved hers away. Along with all the protective gear, Anjali donned her listening shrink face and followed the other two into the morgue. "We've had it for 49 hours, was all the warning the doctor gave them before asking an orderly to drag out one of the drawers in a wall cabinet. Years ago, on a college trip to Europe, Anjali had visited an exhibition of preserved human bodies. Sinew, kidney, lung, blood vessel, and bone all turned to plastic. then placed inside glass cases. She'd felt a shiver go down her body, goosebumps on her bare arms, all that backlit lace of blood vessels, the swirling weave of nerves, the bulge of muscles, the vacant eye sockets and grinning teeth. All of that worked inside of her too. She'd half expected to smell a whiff of decay, but detected none. No formaldehyde either, that funk which clung to her through modules during medical school. Under the white glare of halogen bulbs, the plastic sheet-covered body on the slab smelled like meat past its use-by date. Anjali clenched her jaw, but no amount of preparation could have contained her gasp. She stared at the face, if you could still call it that, stewed away, leaving behind a slick mess with stubs of bone poking out. The body had bloated to almost twice its normal size, like an alien from a B-grade sci-fi movie. Anjali shoved her hands into the pockets of the lab coat and dug her nails into her thigh. The Vicks protected her somewhat, but she saw Kusum raise her knuckles to her nose. What happened to her face? The question shot out of Anjali before she could stop herself. Jatin had not warned her about this.
Our next reader is Preeta Samarasan. Preeta burst into the international writing scene with this amazing debut novel, Evening is the Whole Day. This book looks at the socio-politics of Malaysian society with an absolutely unflinching gaze. And in recent years and months and weeks even, Preeta has gone on to write some really thought-provoking articles on Malaysia and make us all question how we look at Rohingyas or the Indian Malaysian community or the refugees. A lot of really thoughtful, provocative articles. If you have not read her recent article in the Culture Review mag, you really should try and get a copy of that, because she talks about race in a way that we should all be thinking about. So without more waffling, I am just going to hand you over to the fabulous, fearless Preeta Samarasan.
Hi everyone, I'm going to read an excerpt from a short story entitled Sarala and Jaya, which was published about 2 years ago in a literary journal called Copper Nickel. Sarala and Jaya. My father did not like to see a guest at his table slogging through a chicken breast. Not even the bishop's nose was good enough for a guest. Not even a wing. That itself should tell you what kind of man he was. When we were expecting people, he would get himself to the main market at opening time and buy one nice fat chicken for every 2 guests. In this way, he could guarantee a drumstick and an upper thigh on each of their plates. On the day his sister from Kuantan was to arrive, he had gone one step further. He had purchased 5 young hens the previous week. My mother and our maidservant Jaya were to feed these birds a pure and wholesome diet of grain for the full week, at the end of which my father would kill the birds himself. He had undertaken this extra effort because he knew, we all knew, that my aunt was coming to discuss the marriage of her only son to my eldest sister, Sarala. 5 hens, 5 daughters, my mother said when my father was out of earshot. Lead the hens to slaughter one by one. Marry off the daughters one by one. What's the difference, actually? She said it to make us laugh, to ridicule my father, in the way women did behind men's backs. Some women's mockery skirted so close to the truth that it could only have been an instrument of survival, a way to cook up a kind of oversalted strength and hand-feed it to each other in a private female ritual. But my mother's teasing was not like that. She was one of the lucky ones, after all. She had been married at 18 to an honest man with a proper government job. A man who spoke quietly, but said things that took your breath away. Each of my daughters is worth 10 sons. My wife is more beautiful at 45 than she was on the day I married her. Men talk big only. It is women who hold up the family and keep the world running. He was kind and generous, gentle and reasonable. My mother did not believe marriage to be a death sentence. But she cracked that joke, as I have said, to make us laugh. And laugh we did, especially Jaya, who had a high, keening laugh, a sound like a horse in trouble, a bit of wheeze, a bit of whinny. Jaya had come to my parents shortly after the birth of my eldest sister. She was 10 or so at the time, the daughter of one of my mother's poor cousins up north, who had had 7, 8 children before something happened and she became a vegetable. My parents adopted Jaya, the eldest girl, in the old-fashioned sense of the word. Jaya got a roof over her head and 3 meals a day, in exchange for which she would be nursemaid, kitchen maid, washerwoman, and cleaner, as well as looking after them in their old age, for it went without saying that girls adopted in this way would not be married off. Nor would the question of schooling have come up, for in those days many families did not even educate their own daughters, and those few girls who went to primary school were taken out at puberty, as a matter of course. My parents were pioneers in that regard. Relatives visiting from outstation would never fail to remark, "Oh, your daughters are still schooling, huh?" So that there were always school books of every level lying around the house. Alphabet primers, Look and Read, The Royal Reader, Shakespeare plays, and we all grew up, accustomed to the sight of Jaya lying on the choir mat in the room she shared with my 3 oldest sisters, holding one of our books high above her face in the hour or so of rest time she had every afternoon. Sometimes she would appear to follow the words with a finger, and I do remember Sarala gently mocking her once. "Studying for your senior Cambridge, Jayaka?" But not long after that, Sarala began to teach Jaya to read. We never knew if Jaya had asked to learn, or if Sarala conceived the idea out of guilt or some nebulous notion of improving the world. We would see them, sitting cross-legged side by side on the choir mat, Sarala pointing and Jaya reading haltingly. Lesson 1. A ting-ting man. Every boy likes this man. Boys like to buy things from him. Like any dedicated teacher, Sarala derived great pleasure from her pupils' progress. "Akka's doing book 2 now," she would report to the rest of us, her face shining with accomplishment. At the dinner table, she would announce, "Today Akka read a whole Aesop's fable." And Jaya would lower her gaze, flutter her lashes, take dainty mouthfuls like a bride. The rest of us would look from Sarala to Jaya, from Jaya to Sarala, trying to make sense of our mixed-up feelings. We wanted to be proud like Sarala was, yet we shared a lurking urge to be cruel, to draw a line in the sand and keep Jaya in her place, because she wasn't one of us, was she? It was easy enough to be kind as long as that was clear, but she had only to seem in danger of forgetting for us to converge like the white blood cells of a wounded animal. "Not bad," one of us would say. 24 years old and already reading Aesop's fables. Why, by age 40, you might almost be able to read the newspaper headlines." Another would add, "Such a pity when you read aloud. Nobody can tell whether you're reading English or Tamil." Sarala would allow us these moments of cruelty, but if we went too far, she would scold, "Don't! You were lucky enough to be born to rich parents and Akka wasn't. That's the only difference, do you realize?" Jaya ate with us at meal times. Proper food. A chicken back or neck, not just rice and salt. She didn't have a bed or mattress of her own, but neither did she sleep on the kitchen floor or in some dim corridor like a servant girl. She'd been given a mat in one of the bedrooms when she first arrived, and there her mat stayed even after first 1, then 2, then 3 sisters moved in with her. When she was sick, my father took her to the doctor, and when in her 20s she began to squint at the clock to tell the time, he took her to the optician to get spectacles made. When the jeweler came to the house before Deepavali or weddings, Jaya too would get a piece of jewellery, naturally not a full set in heavy gold like my mother and sisters and me, but at least a chain or a ring, something to remind her that she was family. When my father returned from his outstation trips with presents or treats for us in his suitcase, he would always pull out at least a bundle of sweets for Jaya. When he had relatives coming from India, he would send money for them to bring saris for all of us, silk ones for us, a cotton one for Jaya. I tell you all this, although I know that some of you, perched up there on the thrones of your modern values, will sneer at my father's generosity, will refuse to recognize it as generosity at all, insisting that it was nothing but concern for appearances masquerading as generosity. Typical rich man's charity, you will call it. Give 5 cents to a beggar and invite the newspaper reporters to take your photo. But consider the time and place that made my parents. In those days, in this place, it was understood that rich people had done something, in this life or a previous one, to deserve their wealth. They owed no fellow mortal charity or apologies. They made their thanksgiving offerings to the gods, and that was that. To do what he did for Jaya, my father had already stepped so far outside convention and expectation that those of his own station thought him a fool. Spending his own money to raise another man's child, they spat. Putting her in the bedroom and feeding her chicken, mutton, fish. You see now, my father would have had to have been a hero, a revolutionary, to treat Jaya as though she were his flesh and blood daughter, and he was no hero. He was just an honest man. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Our next reader is Mohan Ambikapaker. Mohan is a cultural studies scholar who studies the dynamics of multiracial societies in the UK, Malaysia, and the US. He's an associate professor at Tulane University in New Orleans, but he also writes creatively. This is a book, Endings and Beginnings, that has published Mohan's work, and it is edited by Sharon Bakar and me. So I will hand you over to Mohan reading from his work.
Hi, my name is Mohan Ambikapaker. My first reading today will be from my book, Political Blackness in Multiracial Britain. It is an ethnography, which is a hybrid genre that combines both storytelling and analysis. Amina remembered her dad recounting that his childhood village was a place where people didn't know what they were going to eat until the day. Some of Mr. Aslan's village friends had already migrated to London. They called him to come over, saying that there was loads of work that English people did not want to do. He could sweep airport floors and work in the factories. When he first arrived, it was difficult for Amina's dad to find a room to rent. English people did not want blacks in their houses. They had notices on their doors that read, "No wogs." Wog was a racist slur that white Britons used against any non-white person. Eventually, Amina's father secured steady factory work. He married and had 5 daughters, including Amina. The family was assigned their first public housing flat in a project in North Woolwich. As one of the first South Asians in the area, he was nicknamed Paki Ali by his neighbors. That was normal, Amina explained. They weren't trying to be funny. Whenever people talked about him, they would say, "Paki Ali." Women liked him. He was a handsome man. Old ladies loved my dad, Amina said, and then became pensive. It is really easy to call someone Paki, even if that person is Sikh, Hindu, and then, looking at me, she added, Malaysian, Sri Lankan, or whatever. How sad, she added, becoming thoughtful again. I used to get told, what was it? "Oh, you're all right. We don't mean you. You're one of us." But I'm not. Definitely. I'm not one of them, she said. At the end of the day, I have brown skin and I'm very proud of who I am and my background. Black people were called gollywogs. It was awful, she continued. But people used to come around, though, to have my mom's cooking. She was such a fantastic cook, Amina said, breaking into a smile again. And Dad used to do odd jobs for people around here. He was such a good gardener, she added. Amina grew up in East London in the 1970s and 80s when hers was one of only 3 South Asian families in her school. There was also one Afro-Caribbean family. I remember a song that comes to mind. It was, "Ding dong, the bells are ringing, we are going a packy bashing." The people upstairs, they were singing it. And you know we were probably the cleanest family there. I mean, they talk about Asians being smelly and all, but we were the cleanest family there. Simply ridiculous. My dad did not see himself as a black man. Other people, they just see a wog. Amina continued. When push come to shove, they make everyone a Paki or a black bastard. To them, you're not white, so you're all these other things. Because you're not white. Because they are superior. A lot of my work deals with race and racism. And there are also some other themes that I write about in my poems. This poem that I'm going to read now is entitled May 13th, and May 13th for many Malaysians is a very difficult chapter in their history because it was the moment in 1969 when there were some race riots that had taken place following an elections. And I've written this poem in memory of a mentor, Professor Dr. Zavia Yahya, who passed away a few years ago. May 13th. Length and breadth, land and country, the patriarchs have sent word. No one must marry the moon and earth on May 13th. In a packed lorry burning rubber, a boy without slippers will arrive undead at Stadium Chin Woo on May 13th. Along a smoky 5-foot way, an auntie who walks on 1 foot will be sent to heaven by a symphony of machetes on May 13th. When kerosene is poured, a man caught watching Hindi movies will be asked once and for all which race he is on May 13th. In a crimson back alley, a man utters the prayer, "Saya tak salah," and cumulus clouds will send an afternoon rain of iron pipes on May 13th. And so, every year, the patriarchs will remind everyone, do not forget, no one must marry the moon and earth on May 13th. The following poem was also written in response to a very unfortunate tragedy. These were the bombings that had taken place in Sri Lanka during Easter Day in 2019. And the poem is in conversation with another poem by Nick Makoha. Is it possible to rhyme country and church after payloads eviscerate flesh on Easter? What if the tomb contained only body parts? Will the miracle yeast rise evenly? What made you so sure about the inviolable church? Did the loss of beginnings and home make you conjure sanctuary? Did you hope someone would say, "Welcome, brother," before bullets sprinkled holy blessings? Did you not see the thumb? Did you not see the flayed thumb of the child who stuck his tongue out at you? Or the blood of the cinnamon peeler's daughter in the chalice? What time, brown cow? Are there no prayerful bells in church? That poem was entitled Easter. This is a poem that also deals with grief, but of a more personal kind. This is a poem written shortly after the passing away of my father, when we were cleaning up his things, and these were boxes of things that he had kept in the storeroom in our house. and the poem is entitled Storeroom. All that is left of you, Papa, is in the storeroom Amma once cleared. We have sold your car, given away your clothes, closed your bank account, shredded documents. Little by little, we are erasing irrelevance, like your body in ashes that skimmed the sea before sinking. In a body of newspaper clippings, I touched a familiar collection of interests: the country's politics, workers' struggles, children's education. And it breaks all over again. Here lies the worries that made a father's life. The following poem is entitled God Says Don't Shout at Me, but it's really not about God. It's about my 7-year-old son, who was very upset with me when I would get angry and raise my voice at him. And I just imagined that he was God protesting against my impatience. God says, don't shout at me if I'm late, if I've not put on my shoes in time for school, if I don't like sitting at a table to eat the food you prepared, but prefer playing music on the ebony keys, if I like throwing precious ornaments down the stairs and wish to run fast without looking left, right, and left again, I assume the world is my smile. Why won't you join me, my distant father? Why don't you see that I am finally before you, as you so wished, as your tears testified, in mute prayers, in lost languages? I am here, my father, as your sacrifice, and, like perfume, smell me. The final poem I will read is called Not Easy to Go to Heaven. It is not easy to go to heaven, my mother says. Some people have not finished their karma and will be reborn. Some are free and will not come back, so that's why we light the lamp. How else would they know all the relatives left behind? It's like the Chinese, you know, when they sweep during All Souls Day, or when the Malays bring rose water and flower petals to the graves. It's like that. Before the rupture, we were a people bound to the last sigh.
Our next reader is the very talented Hanna Alkaf, who blazed into the writing scene in Malaysia with the phenomenal debut young adult novel titled The Weight of Our Sky. It was published by Simon & Schuster in 2019, and it deals with the May 13 riots in a very, very thoughtful and interesting way. She now has a middle grade debut, The Girl and the Ghost, which will be published by HarperCollins in 2020. Hanna has won many prizes for her work, and she continues to challenge us and make us rethink prejudices, whether it is about race or mental health. She is a very exciting rising star.
Hi everyone, my name is Hanna Alkaf and I'm here to take part in readings thanks to an invitation from Dipika Mukherjee. Hi Dipika. If you know me at all, you probably know me as the author of this book, which is called The Weight of Our Sky and came out last year. But I won't be reading to you from that today because chances are everybody is absolutely sick and tired of that book by now. So I will be reading to you a couple of chapters from this book, which is called The Girl and the Ghost, and which will be published by HarperCollins on August 4th of this year. Yes, it is as much a surprise to me as anyone else that they let me write another book. Now, The Girl and the Ghost is a middle grade novel, so it's for ages 8 to 12, and it's the story of Suraya, a little girl who inherits a dark spirit from a grandmother that she's never met and never knew, and turns it into a friend and a companion, with predictably dire consequences as she begins to grow older and make her own friends and realize just what this spirit is capable of. It is a middle grade horror. Now, I know, or I'm guessing, that most of you who are watching this right now are probably way beyond the age confines of middle grade, but I'm going to read you a couple of chapters from this anyway, because I don't have anything else to read to you. So that's basically it. Before I do go on, I know this has been a very long past few months as we go through this movement control order, and I know it's about to come to an end, or it's sort of easing off a little bit for most of us. But I do want to remind everybody that for those marginalized communities, they're going to be feeling the effects of this movement control order long after it's actually over, and they're going to need help. So if you are able to extend any help, whether it's in the form of donations or goods or just your time, please visit kitajagakita.com to find out how you can help. And now that PSA is over, I'm going to begin reading. So we're going to start at the prologue. The ghost knew his master was about to die, and he wasn't exactly unhappy about it. He knew that sounded bad. You'd think, after all those years together, that even he might have felt a twinge of sadness about the whole situation. But it's hard to feel sorry for someone when A, you're a ghost, and everyone knows ghosts don't have hearts, and B, that someone made her living out of forcing you to make other people miserable. He stared at her now as she lay on the narrow bed, grey and gaunt in the light of the full moon, her breath rasping and shallow. Watching her teeter slowly towards the end was a bit like watching a grape slowly become a raisin. The years had sucked the life and vitality out of her until she was nothing but a wrinkled shell of her former self. Well, she wheezed, squinting at him. Well, he said. One more for the road, eh? She said, nodding to the full moon out the window. And she grimaced as she offered him the ring finger of her right hand, as she had done so many times before. The ghost nodded. It seemed frivolous, but after all, he still needed to eat, whether or not his master lay dying. As he bent his head over the wrinkled hand, his sharp little teeth pricking the skin worn and calloused from time and use, the witch let out a sharp breath. Her blood used to be rich and strong and so thick with her magic that the ghost could get himself drunk on it, if he wasn't careful. Now all he tasted was the stale tang of age, the sour notes that came with impending death, and a bitter aftertaste he couldn't quite place. Regret, perhaps. It was the regret that was hardest to swallow. The ghost drank nothing more than he had to, finishing quickly and sealing the tiny pinpricks of his teeth on her skin with spit. It is done, he told her, the words familiar as a favorite song, the ritual as comforting as a warm blanket. And I am bound to you until the end. The witch patted his horned head gently. Her touch surprised him. She had never been particularly affectionate. Well, she said, her voice nothing more than a sigh. The end is now. And she turned her head to the window, where the sun was just rising over the cusp of the world, and died. Chapter 1. For a while after the witch drew her final breath, the ghost sat very still, wondering what to do next. Theoretically, he knew what was supposed to happen. He was a Balisite, after all, and a Balisite must have a master. And since he was bound by blood, his new master had to be of the same blood as the old. It was finding this new blood that was going to be tricky. The witch had not been much for family, or friends, or, if he was being completely honest, people in general. There was a daughter, he knew, a little girl with lopsided pigtails and an equally lopsided grin. He had seen pictures of her, pictures the witch kept hidden in a drawer among bits of broken candles, coupons for supermarket deals long expired, a small mountain of coins, things she no longer had use for, or that weighed her down, things she had forgotten or wanted to forget. There were letters, too, slanted words written in deep blue ink, the paper old enough that yellow age stains had started to blossom at the edges. I know you don't approve, but he loves me and I love him and we want to be together. We have our own home now. Wouldn't you like to come and visit us? Please write to me, Mama. I miss you. Won't you want to see your grandchild? The last one was newer, a rectangle of plain white tucked into a crinkly brown envelope bearing the witch's name. It said, "Do not contact us again." No, the old witch wasn't much for family. Instead, she roamed from village to village, sending the ghost out to cause all sorts of chaos in each one. And in the beginning, he'd loved it. There was a sort of dark pleasure in going about a village in his other form, that of a tiny, unassuming grasshopper, bringing bad luck wherever he went, in souring the milk while it was still in the cows, in emptying the fish traps without leaving a single hole in the weave of the net, so that the fishermen scratched their heads in confusion, in rotting whole fields of crops only on the inside, so that the harvester's hopes lifted at the sight of perfect-looking fruit, only for it all to explode in maggots and gloriously bad smells at the lightest touch. The ghost would look at his work with pride, like an artist admiring his own masterpiece, and chuckle to himself when the villagers came looking for the wise and learned witch, who nodded sagely, took the money they offered her to rid them of their curses, never letting them suspect she was the cause of all their troubles in the first place. Magically, everything would go back to normal, and before long, the witch would disappear again on the road to somewhere new, always before anyone figured out that the true curse had been her presence all along. But if he was honest with himself, as the years passed, he found it all very tiresome. There was a steady stream of customers at the witch's door, and if they weren't asking for a way to undo her handiwork, they were asking for the same petty meanness, the same tiny bad magics as all the others. A curse on this business, a pox on that house, an impossible to remove wart on that one's nose. Humans, the ghost thought, were just so unimaginative. He was hoping this new master, wherever they might be, would mean a change of pace, new management, as it were. He pictured the little girl with the pigtails and the wide grin, and he stretched out his thoughts, spreading them as wide as he could, listening for the familiar song of the blood calling to him, feeling for its comforting warmth coursing through fresh new veins, pumping through a strong new heart. He found her in a wooden house on the edge of green paddy fields, a house that rattled and shook when the monsoon winds blew. She was a woman now, tall and tired and pale. Her pigtails had been replaced by a severe bun, and her grin had long since vanished, but there was no mistaking that she had the blood. And yet, the ghost sniffed, puzzled. That familiar calling song was faint and weak, sometimes fading out altogether. And even when her eyes were open, there were shutters behind them that remained very definitely closed. It was as if the light inside her had burned out, and nobody had bothered to replace the bulb. For a long moment the ghost paused, wavering uncertainly between staying and going. On the one hand, the witch had been adamant. A Palisade must have a master to control his appetite for destruction, his craving for chaos. Already he could feel the tug of the darkness, hear the little voice inside him whispering thoughts of ruin and rampage. At the same time, he wasn't even sure this woman's blood would be strong enough to bind him and keep the darkness at bay. The ghost was still trying to make up his mind when he heard it, the laughter. This is how he learned that there was also a child. Thanks for listening, guys.
Okay, everyone, so that was our show for today, and I hope that you all really enjoyed it and that you will continue to support local writing and local publishing and just have lots and lots of books to read in the days and weeks and years to come. Thank you so much for joining us today. Goodbye.